I wonder, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'm getting some yeses. That's a good sign, a good start. Okay, well, hi everybody, and thank you very much for being here today. I know some of you, it's midnight apparently in Siberia, so some of you are making a considerable effort to be here, so thank you for that. My name is Rachel Roberts, and as you may know, I'm one of the authors of IELTS Foundation, which is aimed at students preparing for IELTS who start at around 4 to 5.5 on the IELTS scale. I just wondered how many of you are actually familiar with this book. Could you tick if you've used it, please? Okay, yes, there's some yes, some no. That's fine. Just useful for me to have an idea, really, whether you're familiar with it or not. Well, IELTS Foundation came very directly out of mine and my co-author's experience of teaching these lower level students IELTS and the support that we found that they needed in order to tackle IELTS. Now, as you may know, in a few weeks the second edition of IELTS Foundation is coming out. It's been a while since the first edition, so the revisions have been quite substantial. Certainly we've written more than 50% new material, but we hope that we have kept what I think many people found helpful about the first edition, that aspect of step-by-step support and guidance, as well as hopefully improving and updating the material. So in this session we're going to take a look at some of the issues for learners with the IELTS writing tasks and at some activities and strategies to help them. Now, I'd like to try and make this session as interactive as possible, so I will be encouraging you to use the text box and ticks and crosses and things. I probably won't be able to concentrate on questions as we go along. There's just too many things I've got to juggle. But I think Caroline will be collecting them, and there will be time at the end for questions as well. Okay? So to start with, I'm going to show you some extracts from students' essays. These are all genuine examples from students that we taught. So here we go. Right, so I'd like you to take a look at these extracts and just think about what difficulties you can identify from looking at these extracts. Do any of them seem familiar from your students' work? Feel free to write any comments in the chat box. I'll give you a few minutes to look at them. Okay, yeah, so people are picking up things like spelling, syntax, prepositions, grammar. Yeah, I'd agree with all of those. Direct translations, yes, probably. Style. Are any of these familiar from your students, these kinds of things? Yes, says Ellen. Yeah, construction of the composition, absolutely. Okay, so that's interesting. I'm sure that we do have very similar experiences. And we will look again at some of these examples later in the webinar and look at how we might categorize them. Okay, so let's look now at how students' writing is assessed for the IELTS writing tasks. Okay, as you probably know, there are 4 areas. task achievement and response, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. Now, just out of interest, which of these do you think students find the most difficult? You could write your ideas in the text box, perhaps. So which of these areas do you think is the most difficult for students? Yes, I should have numbered them, shouldn't I? First two, grammatical range, first, second. All of them. Yes, I've had students like that. Okay, that's interesting. There's quite a lot of, not exactly disagreement, but people who have different experiences. However, a lot of people are talking about the first two, which is interesting. I think I would probably agree with that in terms of the students I've taught, although they do tend to have problems with all of the areas, as somebody said. Okay, let's start then by looking at the first area, at task achievement. Now, task achievement relates to task 1, which is where they have to write about data. Okay, and IELTS says that they have to be able to identify the most important and relevant information and the trends in a graph, chart, table or diagram, and they have to give a well-organized overview of it. And of course the language also has to be appropriate. Now, in my experience, and I'm guessing probably in yours too, many students actually struggle with identifying the most important information and trends. And we feel that this is a skill which needs to be very clearly focused on. So I'd like to show you an extract from the new edition of IELTS Foundation so that you can see how we focused on identifying the main features. So first of all, there's a lead-in about the topic of Australia, because this chart is about how many tourists from 5 countries visited Australia over the years from 2006 to 2010. We're talking about task 1 at the moment, by the way, just answering a question. So we start off with a lead-in, okay, and then we want to get them interacting a little bit with the table. So we ask them here, see if I can use this arrow. Oh, there we go. We ask them here, okay, sorry, I've lost it now. Okay, we ask them first of all, which country do most visitors come from? So that's a general question to start them interacting. Then we want to ask them which of these statements is the most suitable general description of the table. So this is really to get an overview. It's very important that they can see the most important facts and to give an overview. So do you want to have a go at that? Which do you think, which statement is the most suitable general description for the data, 1 or 2? Okay, we've got some answers here. Yeah, everybody's saying 2. Excellent. All right. So yes, all right. So that's given the overview. Then we want to drill down a little further, and so we look at 6 statements here and ask them which of 3 of these could be described as main features. Now, I won't ask you to do this, but the answers are 1 and 2 and 5, because these refer to overall trends rather than just specific bits of isolated information. Because this is such a key skill, the students need plenty of practice. And I think a good regular warmer actually for an IELTS class is to give the students a chart or a table to look at and ask them to do something very similar to this. Ask them to select what they think are the key features. What would they say as an overview and what would be the key features? And then they can compare what they thought with another pair, all right, or with a partner. Lots and lots and lots of practice at identifying the key points, I think, is really important. and where a lot of students go horribly wrong. With task 2, so now talking about task 2, task achievement is called task response. Now it's still about relevancy and what is most relevant, but now it's about really understanding exactly what the question is about, what is it asking, and it's very important that the students can make their position clear. Now, academic essays in the English-speaking world are written in a very specific way, and as you probably know, this might be quite different from the cultural norms of the students. Now, there's a very well-known piece of research by Kaplan, which dates right back to 1966. It's probably a bit simplistic. However, it does make some interesting points about these cultural differences in writing academic essays. So this diagram, okay, which comes from Kaplan, the link is at the bottom, shows a sort of pictorial representation of how an academic essay might be structured. So according to Kaplan, and I would agree, the classic organisational pattern in English is a straight line of development. So you've got the introduction, you've then got each paragraph with a topic sentence that gives the main idea, the supporting information, and then finally you have a conclusion. Or another way of putting this is, this is what I'm going to say, this is what I'm saying, and this is what I have said. Now, for example, apparently Chinese writers, it tends to be more circular, and the main topic is only mentioned relatively obliquely until you get to the end. Now, I can really relate to this because my first degree was in English literature, and we were taught to write essays where we didn't kind of give away the conclusion until the end. You could hint at it, but then it would be presented at the end. And when I took my master's degree in English language teaching, I had to relearn how to write an academic essay in a more sort of social sciences style, where you say what you're going to say and then you say it and then you say that you've said it. And I found that quite hard. And I think, you know, students do have different ways of organising rhetoric, and we need to take that into account. Now, I'm certainly not an expert on different rhetorical patterns in different cultures. So, yeah, the difference between Romance and Russian, for example, I think I would have to study Kaplan in more detail. However, what it does show us, I think, is that there are differences which we need to consider, that we cannot just assume that how an essay is organised in English is obvious, because it isn't obvious, and it isn't necessarily going to be something that students can transfer from their first language. So for this reason, it's very important, we think, that students are given plenty of guidance and clear models for the writing task. So one of the features of IELTS Foundation is that there are models, in fact there are more models in the second edition. There are models for every piece of writing in the book. And we also try to carry out a very step-by-step approach to the organisational pattern. So I'm going to show you an example of this so you can see what I mean. Okay, so here's a question. This is from Unit 2. And so have a look at the question and think about what you think the key words in the question are. What are the most important words in the question? You can either just think about it, or if you want to write them in the text box, that's great too. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Yeah, I agree, Anastasia. Something like this is what I would expect. Right, so the key things here are individual actions versus governmental level, little or no effect, climate change, obviously that's the main topic, worthwhile change. So worthwhile change is contrasted with little or no effect. So here we're thinking about the key ideas. Now this looking for keywords is something that we ask students to do throughout the book. In a similar way to looking at the most relevant information in task 1, in task 2, I think finding what the keywords are in the question is absolutely central in terms of task response or task achievement. And it's something that they need to be practicing a lot. In this unit, which as you can see, it's a unit 2, it's near the beginning of the book, we actually get them thinking about the key ideas and formulating their response before they even look at the question. So this is the first thing that the students are asked to do. So they're brainstorming ideas for preventing or slowing climate change and thinking in terms of individual actions and government actions. So they start off by thinking about it, then they look at the question and identify the key words, as we've already seen. Students then move straight on to looking at the model answer, okay, which is here. So they're asked, read the following model answer. Does the writer agree with the statement, disagree, or partly agree? And they're asked, which paragraph gives you the writer's opinion most clearly? This is an early unit, so we felt that the students needed to see how an effective essay might work before they even started writing one. So this is the model answer that we have in the book. Now, a big part of how an essay works is, of course, the second criteria for IELTS, the idea of coherence and cohesion. Now, a lot of you said that students had problems with that, and that would certainly be my experience as well. So, by coherence and cohesion, we mean, of course, whether the writing flows logically, whether it works as a whole, and also cohesion, whether it's held together well internally, like between sentences, within paragraphs. So we have various ways in which we try to support students in this. And there's a lot of work on identifying the main idea in a paragraph or the topic sentence, and then looking at how supporting ideas and examples can be used to strengthen this main idea. So with this model answer, first of all, we ask the students to identify the topic sentences. I'll just give you a minute to have a look. What do you think the topic sentences are? You don't need to write anything, that might be quite a lot of typing. Just think about it before I show you what we think. Okay, so this is what we identified as the topic sentences. Generally speaking, but I think there is actually a figure. I think it's something like 64% of the time, the topic sentence will be the first sentence in the paragraph. Now, it isn't always the case, but at this level, I think that's a very good rule of thumb, right, to give students. I think if they're working on the basis that it's the first sentence that should have the main idea, that's giving them quite a good start in creating a paragraph that has some coherence. Okay? So once they've identified the topic sentence, we then go on and ask them to say, okay, looking at this topic sentence, what is the topic of each topic sentence? and what is the main idea about it. So, for example, this one here in the second paragraph, you have the main idea, sorry, the topic rather, is government action. So this is all talking about government action. And the main idea is that the problem is so big that it needs to be government action that deals with it. Okay? Or in the third paragraph, the topic of this whole topic sentence is about responsibility. Okay? And the main idea is that we are all individually responsible. Right. Then we ask them to look at what the supporting ideas and examples are. Okay, so for example, in paragraph 2 here, we're talking about government action on the problem, and we have some examples of government action and national action. Okay? All right, so we've analysed this in some detail. Right, then we go on, after the analysis, to build up their ability to write a paragraph in this way. And finally, they go on to write an essay on a similar topic. So it's a very staged process. It's very step by step. We're holding their hand all the way. Now, when we're talking about coherence and cohesion, it's obviously not just about topic sentences, but more looking at the coherence of the essay. There's also the idea of cohesion, so how things link together. And we do work on referencing and lexical linking as well. So let me show you an example of this. Okay, reference. So this is from a later unit. This is from Unit 8. And again, it's a very step-by-step procedure. So first of all, the students are guided to understand what reference is. Right? So we ask them to read this short text here and to see how the underlined parts of the text could be improved. So we have acupuncture is one of the oldest alternative therapies. Acupuncture originated in China. So there's a lot of repetition in the text, and hopefully they can get to see that. Next, right, we ask them to see how reference works in context. Right? So we get them to see what has been replaced. So a cough is a reflex action which happens when nerves are stimulated in the lining of the respiratory passages by something which should not be there. And there refers back to the lining of the respiratory passages. Next, we get them to do some fairly controlled practice. So here they're having to replace what is underlined with a suitable piece of reference, so it, they, them. And then finally, we get them to look at their own work and see if they can improve its cohesion and avoid repetition. So again, it's very step by step. And obviously, this is another example of a series of exercises that you could do with any text. You could do it with a text from a book or an IELTS practice text, or even their own work or a model answer from the back of the book. It's just to help the students see how things link together, and it can do a lot, I think. If you can get them to avoid too much repetition, this can really improve the kind of result that they'll get in the coherence and cohesion of their writing. As well as reference, we look at lexical linking. This is from the next unit, so it's a follow-on from the reference work. Now they've done some reading. It says look back at the texts on page 102 and 103. So they've done some reading, they've done some comprehension work on it, and now we go back to the text and get them to see how vocabulary can be used. As it says in the tip, writers use different words with similar or related meanings to link different parts of the text together. And understanding these links can help you follow the text. So it's good for comprehension as well as for writing. So there are 3 short texts, and they're asked to find 2 words in each which have a similar meaning. So I'm just going to let you have a go at the first one. I'm going to show you the text. see if you can find two words which have a similar meaning, one that has a similar meaning to tool and one that has a similar meaning to crow. Now this will be harder for you than the students because you haven't read the text before, but I'm sure you can cope. So here's the text. See if you can find one word that has a similar meaning to tool and one that has a similar meaning to crow. I'll give you a few minutes. Yes, some people have got the first one. Can anybody find a word that's similar in meaning to tool? It's near the end. Yeah, somebody's got it. Okay. Yes, so for crow, we could use bird here, or the male bird. And for tool, another word here is implement. Now obviously, as I said, this was much harder for you because you weren't familiar with the text, whereas the students would be very familiar with it. But again, this is an example of a task which you could easily do yourself with any text that you used. And you can get, as students get more proficient, you could get them to set similar tasks for them, for each other. Okay, so this task is then followed up in the writing section of Unit 9, because we are talking about writing. Okay, and here we bring together reference and lexical links, and the students are shown a possible paragraph 4 for the essay that they're working on, and there are some questions which get them to see the reference. Okay, so for example, number 1, it says, which phrase introduces a further type of intelligence and thus provides a link with the previous paragraph? Okay, that would be a final example of another aspect of intelligence. Okay, and that's how that links backwards. Or which word refers back to people in sentence 1? Okay, they, all right, refers back to people. So again, this is something that you could very easily do yourself with a piece of student's work or with a reading text. Now, at the beginning, we discussed which were the most difficult areas of IELTS writing. People's opinions varied, but vocabulary certainly came up for some people. And I think for students, it's very often the first thing that they mention. Would you agree? Do you think that students worry a lot about vocabulary for IELTS? Yes, I'm getting some yeses. Certainly the students I've taught do. Yes, too much, there's somebody. Yes, quite possibly too much. I think it's something quite concrete that students can concentrate on, whereas coherence and cohesion, I think, is harder for them to grasp what the problem is. Now, IELTS say that lexical resource includes the range of vocabulary you have used and how accurately and appropriately you use it. So here are some examples from the first slide that we looked at. If we look at this one, many factories put dirty water in rivers and pull out a lot of smoke. I think that's a good example of not having very much range. Okay, they've got the word smoke, but we don't have pollution, we don't have emissions. Okay, a country develops up and up. I think that would probably be a good example of not much accuracy. Okay, because you can't develop up and up. And then the last one is definitely an example of not being very appropriate. Okay, it is quite sweet, as somebody said, but it's not really very appropriate to ask these rhetorical questions in this kind of essay. So these are the sorts of problems that students have. Now, in terms of range, I think, you know, it's very difficult for students at this level, not to say impossible really, over a short time, to reach the range of vocabulary that they would need for a really high score. However, I think it is relatively straightforward to improve lower level students' vocabulary in some key IELTS related topic areas. Now, just out of interest, what do you think are some of the key topics in IELTS? Would you like to write some in the text box? For example, to set you off, the environment, I think, is a key topic in IELTS. Yes, somebody's got that. That's always the first one that people mention. Yes, society, personality, education, home, environment, society, health, religion, maybe. I haven't seen too much of that. Work, yes, definitely. Animals, relationship, science, technology. Okay, so these are the kinds of topics. We know, don't we, as teachers, what kinds of topics are likely to come up. And those are the topics that we have tried to focus on in the new edition of IELTS Foundation. And we've tried to give students a range of vocabulary around that topic. However, it is very important that they are able to use this vocabulary appropriately rather than just kind of shoving it in to the essay. So we've tried to introduce vocabulary wherever possible in context. So this is an example. This is from Unit 2. It's quite small, I think, but hopefully you get the idea. The words in the blue box are all related to issues to do with congestion. So we've got bus lane, carpooling, congestion, gridlock, park and ride, road pricing, traffic jam, rush hour. And they all come from the text that the students are going to read. So they're going to see all of these words in context. So they start off by looking at the words, they talk about the issues, the teacher can check that they understand them, and then they go on to read a text in which the vocabulary is actually used in context. Okay. Similarly, okay, this is from the same unit, which is about the environment, favourite topic. We've got words here like bottle bank, dustbin, landfill, litter, recycling bin, rubbish, scrap metal, waste. And these all come up in the listening task that the students are going to hear. But we start off by checking that the students understand them, so they're looking at the pictures, seeing if they can describe them. Then they're trying to categorize the words. So these are ways of working with the vocabulary to check understanding. And then they're going to hear them in context. And then they'll be able to use them, because both sets of vocabulary are then used later on in the writing task in this unit. We also have a regular feature on collocation. Okay, this is just one example. So this is from Unit 3, which is a unit about sort of travel and tourism. And these are all words that can collocate with the verb travel or the noun traveller. And this is a sort of a regular slot. Okay. Again, this is to try to get the students to be able to actually use the vocabulary rather than just knowing isolated words, because using those within the writing is not necessarily going to help them to get a better score. They're only going to get a better score if they can use them appropriately. Now, this also applies, I think, to the fourth criteria, the grammatical range and accuracy. Now, about this, IELTS says, okay, grammatical range and accuracy includes the range of grammar you have used and how accurately and appropriately you have used it. So in terms of range, I think the first example, which comes from the first slide that we saw, is a good example of not having that much range of grammar. Okay? So we've got a lot of repetition here. Right. They are using clauses, which is great, but it's just the same clause over and over again. So I think we're not going to, you know, see too much range in terms of grammar, but we can definitely encourage students not to be as repetitive as this first example. And then I think the other major issue for this level of students is really basic errors, like a lot of student likes. So we need to try to get to grips with these basic errors with agreement and articles and that kind of thing. And we have deliberately put in practice of those sorts of areas. Yeah, typical errors, as Marta says. So at this level, I think it's probably quite inadvisable to be trying to get your students to do things like sentence inversions or cleft sentences. But I think there are slightly more complex structures which we can work on, like comparatives, conditional clauses, modals, relative clauses, passives, all right, different tenses, and so on. And I'm just going to show you a sneak preview. All right, these are some of the structures that we focused on in the new edition. So as you can see, sometimes it's a question of getting the basics right. So we've got things like articles, we've got present perfect versus past simple, we've got quantifiers, okay? And sometimes it's something slightly more complex that we think is within the reach of students at this level. So we've got conditionals, real conditionals, or you might call them first conditionals, unreal conditionals, which would be would, second conditionals. We've got defining relative clauses, comparatives, and superlatives, so some slightly more complex stuff. As with vocabulary, we feel it's very important to look at language and context. So an example here is how comparatives and superlatives are introduced. It's within the context of talking about jobs. So students are talking about jobs, they're probably using the language. There's a grammar and vocabulary bank at the back which has explanations, extra exercises. They do some fairly controlled practice. They then use the language first for speaking. So I know we're talking about writing today, but we start off by looking at it in the context of speaking. They're doing a part 2 and a part 3, and it would naturally use comparatives because we're asking them about which jobs are the most dangerous, what's the best way to prepare for a job interview. And then finally, the students are able to use the comparatives and superlatives in writing. So we're back to a task 1 here, and there's a model answer, and the students have to complete the gaps in the sentences using comparative or superlative forms of the verbs. And then, of course, they go on to write about a similar sort of chart with less guidance once they've been given the practice. Okay. Now, many students at this level seem to think that the key to success at IELTS is to write lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of practice essays, and that if they just write enough, they will get better. Unfortunately, I don't think that's true. Obviously, practice is important, but I think that you need to target the practice. You need to focus on what are the key micro skills that will help them to improve. And at this level, it's really about getting the basics or the foundation, which is hence the name of the book, as strong as possible. And we think that students at this level can improve their writing quite significantly by working on the 4 areas that we've considered. So to summarize, here are some steps in the right direction which I would recommend. So in terms of task achievement and response, I think the key thing for task 1 has to be practice identifying key information in the data, which we looked at the beginning of the talk. And for task 2, analysing the questions, finding the keywords, and making your position clear. So you need to be able to say what you think about it. For coherence and cohesion, I think probably the key thing for task 1 has to be work on grouping the ideas together. And for task 2, as we've looked at, work on topic sentences, supporting ideas and examples, and also work on reference and lexical links. Looking at vocabulary, I think it's very important to teach lexis in topic-related groups, and we know what kind of topics come up in IELTS. Also, I would really recommend using lexis from the text that they read and listen to. It's a fantastic resource, I think, for vocabulary. It's something that we've done throughout the book, but it's something that you can do too, obviously. You can get students to look through text once they've looked at them for comprehension and see which words they can find which are related to the topic. That gives them a whole new resource for vocabulary. And make sure that you present lexis in context and that students can use it appropriately. It's really important. It's no good just kind of throwing in brilliant words that actually don't work in those sentences. In terms of grammatical range and accuracy, I think there's no need to attempt really complex sentences. In fact, I would advise you not to encourage them to do too complex sentences, but they should be aiming for more than single clauses if they want to get a decent mark. So things like relative clauses and conditionals are really important, and get them to try to get the basics right, such things as articles and agreement. So thank you. I think there's time for a few questions now. I know that people have been writing things in the box, but I don't think I've seen all of them. Okay, Caroline, do I need to turn my microphone off, or will the questions be in the text box? Some people I know were asking about the level of the book. It's aimed at students who are starting at about 4.5, and that would be the equivalent of about sort of B1 level, if that makes any more sense to you. There are 2 other books actually in the series. There's IELTS Graduation, which I wasn't involved in, but which I know is kind of the next level up, and I believe that Macmillan are also bringing out a lower level book as well. I would say it's more intermediate than pre-intermediate, but the idea really is that we're trying to get students to get as high a mark as possible, but the texts still have to be quite difficult because IELTS texts are quite difficult, so that you will feel that there's some kind of mismatch between the level of the students and the level of the text, but it's about trying to get them as much as possible out. Somebody asked me about which mistakes I find most amusing. Oh, that doesn't seem very kind, does it, to laugh at people? But I guess the one thing that I do sometimes find a bit strange is when students put very personal things in academic essays, like the example we saw at the beginning about "as Michael Jackson says." I may well have missed some other questions, I don't know. If anybody has, somebody's asked about what are the components of the course and are there resources? There's a student's book, there's a teacher's book, there's a study skills book, which is something that the students can use independently, and there are CDs for use in the classroom. There is a higher, Malgorzata asks about are you planning a level 6, but there is a higher level book called IELTS Graduation, but I wasn't actually involved in writing it, but it's called IELTS Graduation. Yes, I think you could definitely use these tips when teaching writing in a mother tongue if, you know, bearing in mind that the coherence and cohesion might vary culturally. How long does it take to finish it? I guess you mean how long is the book run, how long it took me to finish it, which was a long time. It's about 120 hours, but it's quite flexible. You could make it shorter or longer. Diana asks about, I'm not sure what the age limit is on IELTS. In terms of level at upper intermediate, you would be fine. In fact, you can take IELTS at any level because it shows you what level you are. So at upper intermediate, you would probably be expecting to get a 6 or a 7, but you can take it at any level. Is there a marking scheme in the book? We have reproduced the band descriptors that IELTS have made public, which tell you roughly sort of what level each level means. But that's the only information that you're actually allowed to kind of make public. If you look on the IELTS website, there is quite a lot of information on there as well. You'll find it if you just Google IELTS. Any other questions? You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you, Julian. Nice to see you here. Dziękuję bardzo. Somebody asks about whether they should teach general or academic form of IELTS. That very much depends on what the students want to do. The academic form is used for people who want to go to university in this country or Australia or you know, another English-speaking context. The non-academic, the general form of IELTS is generally for people who are looking to emigrate. It's generally an adult exam. There's a lot about the environment, I think, because the subjects that they cover have to be of general interest, but also quite academic, and it's just quite an easy topic, I think, to find material about. That would be my guess. Is using the book enough? Well, you know, I think lots of the more practice you get, the better, really. I would never say that, you know, you should only ever just use the course book. I think the more practice that you get, the better. However, I think if you do everything in the book, you've got a very good grounding. Somebody's saying they got here very late, but it's actually recorded, so you can watch it in the archive on the Macmillan session. Yeah, the writing in IELTS, it is quite different actually, particularly task 1 in the academic version, where you have to write about data. That's really quite different from the main suite of exams. The second part, the essay, isn't as different. Yes, if anybody came in late and you want to watch the whole thing, it is on the Macmillan website. Well, I think, yes, I think a lot of it would be appropriate for the general module. I mean, obviously the tasks are different. You'd be writing a letter probably instead of writing about data. However, I think the general ideas would be appropriate. I'm not too familiar with TOEFL actually, so I wouldn't like to answer the question about whether it's appropriate for TOEFL. Thank you, Katarzyna. Thank you everyone. You've been a very good audience.